The morning flight from Denver to Seattle felt like any normal travel day. Passengers lined up with tired faces, coffee cups, and luggage that always seemed heavier than it should be. No one paid attention to the older woman standing quietly near the end of the boarding line. She wore a plain jacket, worn from years of use, with a small faded patch stitched near the collar. Most people did not even notice that patch. The few who did assumed it was just an old souvenir. No one imagined it meant something far greater. She moved slowly, carrying only a small backpack. When the gate agent scanned her ticket, she whispered a soft thank you and walked down the jet bridge with calm, steady steps. Her seat was 25C on the aisle. A young man in the window seat glanced at her, nodded politely, and went back to scrolling his phone. The middle seat stayed empty, giving her a little extra space, something she seemed grateful for. As she settled in, she looked around the cabin with eyes that had clearly witnessed many years and many stories. There was no sign of pride in her expression, no attempt to show who she had been or what she had done. She simply sat quietly, hands resting on her backpack, as if the world around her no longer demanded anything from her. A flight attendant stopped near her row and smiled, asking if she needed help with anything. She smiled back, shook her head, and said she was perfectly fine. Her voice was soft, but there was strength in it, an old, steady strength that most people on the plane overlooked. Except for one person. In row 22, an off-duty airbase technician sat reading a magazine. His eyes wandered casually around the cabin, the way someone trained around aircraft tends to observe without effort. His gaze paused when he noticed the small patch on the woman's jacket. He leaned forward slightly, trying to confirm what he thought he saw. The patch was old, older than many people on this flight. It belonged to a unit that no longer existed, one that had carried out missions no longer talked about openly. He did not say anything, but suddenly he looked more alert. Back in 25C, the woman closed her eyes for a moment, not to sleep, but perhaps to breathe. She had traveled many times before, but something about this flight felt different to her. Not dangerous, not unsettling, just meaningful, though she couldn't explain why. Maybe it was the weather outside, or the distant sound of jets she heard earlier while arriving at the airport. Familiar sounds. The pilot came on the intercom, introducing himself and the crew. The woman listened politely. When he mentioned that they might see military aircraft training nearby, a faint expression appeared on her face, something between nostalgia and quiet reflection. She nodded slightly, as if remembering a chapter long closed. As the plane pushed back and began taxiing, a small turbulence bump made a teenager in row 27 gasp. The woman in 25C turned her head gently and offered a reassuring smile. She didn't speak loudly, but her calm presence helped settle the young passenger. The mother, sitting beside the teen, mouthed a quiet thank you. The woman nodded again, warm and respectful. During takeoff, she kept her hand on the armrest, but her breathing stayed steady. She was not afraid. She had known skies far more unpredictable than this one. Years ago, she had spent more time above the clouds than most of the pilots who now flew commercial jets, but no one on this flight knew that. To them, she was simply an elderly traveler in seat 25C making her way home or visiting family. Once the flight reached cruising altitude, the crew began serving drinks. The attendant returned to her row and asked if she wanted something warm. She politely declined but thanked her with genuine kindness. The attendant paused again, noticing the patch. She did not recognize it but sensed it meant something significant. She chose not to ask, respecting the woman's quiet nature. Meanwhile, the off-duty technician in row 22 kept glancing back every few minutes. He knew the patch. He knew the stories, some heroic, some heartbreaking, tied to the unit. If the patch was real, then the woman in 25C had lived through moments that shaped entire histories. But she did not appear to want attention. She carried herself like someone who had already seen more than enough of spotlight and praise. Outside, the clouds shifted slightly, creating a soft glow inside the cabin. The woman opened her eyes and looked through the aisle toward a small patch of blue sky visible through a window across the aircraft. It brought a faint smile to her face, a smile that hinted at memories of open skies, roaring engines, and missions flown in silence. She whispered something under her breath, so soft that no one heard. Something about the sky feeling familiar again, and then, far ahead in the distance, two F-35 jets began closing in on the commercial flight's path, unnoticed by every passenger except one, the woman in 25C, whose eyes suddenly sharpened, not in fear, but in recognition. The flight moved smoothly above the clouds, and most passengers relaxed into their seats. Some watched movies, some listened to music, and some slept with their heads resting gently against the windows. But the woman in 25C kept her eyes half open, as if something in the air felt slightly unusual. She was not tense, but she was alert in a way that only experience can teach. Far outside, two distant flashes of light appeared in the sky. They were not bright enough for others to notice, but she knew the pattern instantly. The formation, the angle, the pace, nothing about it was random. She had seen movements like that years ago, during missions that were never written in books. A soft vibration passed through the aircraft, too small to cause worry, but enough to catch her attention. She leaned slightly, looking down the aisle toward the nearest window. Her eyes narrowed for a brief moment, not in fear but in recognition. She had flown in airspace like this before, and she knew when military jets were not just training, but responding. 3 rows ahead, the off-duty technician also noticed the distant silhouettes. He blinked, leaned forward, and looked again. This time he was sure. F-35s were approaching, not aggressively, but with purpose. He turned his head, scanning the cabin again, and his eyes landed on the woman in 25C. She was already watching the sky with a quiet understanding, as if she expected this. The flight crew made no announcement, but there was a small change in the cabin atmosphere, subtle, almost hidden. A slight adjustment of speed, a controlled shift in altitude. The kind that meant the pilots were talking to someone on a secure channel. Most passengers could not feel it, but the woman in 25C felt every detail. A child across the aisle suddenly whispered to his mother, asking why the plane felt different. The mother brushed his hair and told him everything was fine. The woman in 25C offered her a gentle smile, one filled with reassurance, but inside she knew something was happening beyond the passenger's awareness. Then, a quiet tone echoed from the ceiling speakers. It was not an alert tone, just a soft signal used by the cockpit to call a flight attendant. But the woman understood its meaning. The tone told her there was communication happening that the airline did not want to disturb passengers with. Moments later, one of the attendants walked briskly toward the front of the cabin. She kept her expression controlled, but her steps were faster than before. The woman in 25C watched carefully. She recognized that kind of walk. She had used that same pace many times, calm on the outside, urgent on the inside. The technician in row 22 finally turned around and leaned closer to her aisle. "Ma'am," he said softly, careful not to draw attention. "You saw them too, didn't you?" Her eyes met his. There was a pause, brief but heavy. Then she nodded once, slowly. The technician exhaled, almost in relief that someone else understood. "F-35s don't fly that close unless there's a reason," he whispered. She didn't answer at first. Instead, she looked forward, sensing. Rather than seeing the changes in the air, "They're not here for danger," she finally said in a quiet voice. "They're here for confirmation." The technician frowned. Confirmation of what? But she did not reply. Her gaze had turned to the window as the shadows of 2 military jets drifted closer, now visible as faint shapes against the sky. A few passengers noticed the movement and murmured, wondering if it was some kind of air show or routine escort. But the woman in 25C knew better. She recognized the tail markings. They were from a base she once worked with. A base that trained some of the most respected pilots in aviation. Pilots who followed strict protocols. Pilots who never deviated from mission rules unless something extraordinary had been signaled to them. Her heart beat a little faster, not from fear, but from memory. Outside, the F-35 slid into a perfect formation beside the commercial jet. Not threatening, not chasing. Watching, escorting. Their presence made no sense to anyone except her. Inside the cockpit, the captain received a message from the approaching fighters. He read the coded instruction twice, confused. The message was simple. Confirm passenger identity. Seat 25C. He looked at his co-pilot, unsure what to make of it. Why would high-level military jets request information about a single passenger? On a routine flight? The co-pilot pressed the cabin call button. A moment later, the same flight attendant who had earlier walked past row 25 arrived at the cockpit door. "We need you to check on someone," the captain said quietly. "Seat 25C. The attendant hesitated, then nodded and stepped back into the hallway. She did not know what was happening, but the seriousness in the captain's voice told her it mattered. Down the aisle she walked, slower this time, her eyes scanning each row. The woman in 25C felt her coming. She straightened gently, not stiff, not nervous, just prepared. The attendant paused beside her row and gave a warm, respectful smile. "Ma'am," she said softly, "the captain would like a word with you. When you're ready." The passengers around them glanced curiously, wondering why someone in 25C would be called. But no one imagined what was unfolding outside the windows. The woman simply nodded. She placed her hand on her small backpack, closed the zipper carefully, and rose from her seat with steady, quiet dignity. Every step she took down the aisle felt like the start of a truth returning to the sky, one that the F-35 pilots were already waiting to honor. The soft hum of the engines grew louder in her ears as she walked toward the front of the cabin. Passengers watched quietly, unsure why someone as calm and ordinary-looking as her would be called by the captain. She did not rush. Her steps were slow, steady, almost graceful, like someone accustomed to walking into rooms where the unexpected waited. The flight attendant guided her with gentle respect, as if she sensed something important about this moment without knowing the full truth. When they reached the front galley, the attendant pressed a small button on the locked cockpit door. A click sounded from within, and the door opened just wide enough for her to enter. Inside, the captain and co-pilot turned in their seats. Their expressions held confusion, but also something softer, something close to respect, even before they knew who she was. "Ma'am," the captain began carefully, "we received an unusual message from two F-35s escorting us." He paused, unsure how to continue. "They requested confirmation about a passenger. You." She showed no surprise. She simply stepped closer, her hand resting lightly on the back of the captain's seat. "What did they say?" she asked. Calmly. The co-pilot cleared his throat. "They asked us to verify your patch. Your jacket patch." She glanced at the faded emblem on her collar, the small stitched symbol most people never looked at twice, so they recognized it. She whispered. The captain exchanged a confused look with his co-pilot. "Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking, who are you?" Before she answered, a sharp tone came through the radio, one the captain had never heard on a commercial channel. A coded military signal. The F-35 pilots were calling again. The co-pilot quickly turned a dial, and the radio crackled with a voice calm, steady. "Professional. Commercial Flight 482, this is Guardian Lead. We are requesting immediate confirmation. Is the passenger in 25C wearing the emblem of the Silent Wing Unit?" The cockpit fell silent. The captain looked at the woman. Silent Wing, he repeated softly. I've heard that name, but I thought it was history. The woman breathed in slowly, like someone remembering a distant photograph. It is history, she said. A long closed chapter. The radio crackled again, sharper this time. Captain, please confirm. Our orders state that if this emblem is present, we stand at full recognition. The co-pilot stared at her with new eyes, not fear, but deep curiosity. The captain leaned toward her. Ma'am, what should I tell them? She nodded once, then reached up and gently touched the patch on her collar. Tell them it's real. The captain pressed the mic button with trembling fingers. Guardian lead, we confirm. The emblem is authentic. Silence followed. A long, heavy silence. Then a voice came through, but it was no longer standard communication. It carried something. Different emotion behind discipline, respect behind protocol. Understood. Flight 482. We acknowledge the presence of Silent Wing designation on board. The woman lowered her head slightly, almost humbled by the words. Suddenly, through the front windows, the F-35s changed formation. They moved from a simple escort position into something more formal, more symbolic, a slow, controlled rise, aligning themselves perfectly above the commercial aircraft. A gesture only used in the rarest moments of honor. The co-pilot gasped softly. They're saluting. The woman did not smile. Instead, her eyes softened with an emotion deeper than pride, and pride and emotion touched with memory. The captain finally turned back to her. Ma'am, the Silent Wing unit, what exactly did you do? She took a slow breath, steadying herself before speaking. We flew missions that never made the news, she said quietly. We protected people who never knew our names. We were trained to appear ordinary, invisible. Even after everything ended, the co-pilot swallowed. But the F-35 pilots, they knew. They were taught, she replied. Taught to recognize the emblem, even if the stories were older than they were. Outside, the jets held their formation, rising slightly in an unmistakable gesture of military respect. The blue glow of the sky reflected on the cockpit glass, making the moment feel even more unreal. The captain looked at her again. Why didn't you tell anyone? She shook her head. I didn't come here to be noticed. I was just traveling. Home. The radio clicked once more, this time with a softer tone. Seat 25C. Guardian lead said directly, switching from protocol to something personal. We honor your service. The sky remembers you. Her eyes closed gently. It had been many years since anyone had spoken to her like that. When she opened them again, the captain waited for her instructions, though he wasn't sure why. He simply felt that she was someone worth listening to. Captain, she said softly, continue your flight. Everything will be fine. He nodded, more reassured by her calm than the military escort outside. As she turned to leave the cockpit, the co-pilot called after her. Ma'am, did you ever fly with them? With pilots like those? She paused at the door. No, she said quietly. They fly because of people we once were. And with that, she stepped back into the cabin, walking toward row 25 as the F-35s held formation. Outside standing guard for someone the world had forgotten. But the sky had not, asterisk, as the woman walked. Back down the aisle, passengers turned their heads out of curiosity. They did not know what had happened in the cockpit, but they could feel something had changed in the air. The flight felt quieter now, as if the sky itself was listening. She returned to seat 25C and gently lowered herself into the chair. The empty middle seat beside her made the space feel almost private. She placed her backpack on her lap, holding it the way someone holds old memories, carefully, gently, as if it contained parts of her life she never shared with anyone. The young man by the window removed his earphones. Ma'am, is everything all right? He asked softly. She smiled. Calm as ever. Yes, everything is all right. But deep inside, something was moving, something she had kept buried for years. The F-35s outside had not awakened fear. They had awakened memory. Memory that carried both weight and warmth. Her eyes drifted toward the window and the sky outside, blurred into a soft haze. In that haze, her mind traveled back to a time long ago, when she was not a quiet traveler in 25C, but a young recruit standing on an airstrip with wind whipping across her face. She remembered her first day with the unit. She stood among others, strong, disciplined, silent. Not silent because they were forced to be, but because their work demanded it. Their missions never appeared in newspapers. Their victories were never celebrated on TV. Their names were never spoken in public. Yet they carried the responsibility of skies no one else dared enter. She remembered training sessions that lasted until stars filled the sky. She remembered the sound of engines being tested at dawn. She remembered stepping into aircraft that looked ordinary from the outside, but held technology few people knew existed at the time. She remembered the oath she took to protect, to serve, and to disappear when the mission ended. To live a life where glory was not the reward. Peace was. Back in the present, she blinked slowly, returning to the hum of the cabin. A soft sigh escaped her, not of sadness but of acceptance. The young man beside her noticed the look in her eyes. "Ma'am, were you in the military?" he asked gently. She did not answer right away. She watched the sunlight touch the wing outside, turning metal into gold. Finally she spoke. "A long time ago," she said quietly. "In a different world." He sensed she didn't want to explain further, so he simply nodded and turned back to the window, giving her space. A few seats behind, the off-duty technician was still staring, his mind racing. He finally understood why she had seemed familiar. He remembered reading old manuals, the rare ones that mentioned the silent wing insignia. They taught young technicians about honor, discipline, and unseen heroes who shaped aviation history. People who paved the way for pilots like those flying the F-35s outside. He whispered to himself. She wasn't just part of it. She must have been one of the originals. In the cabin, the crew communicated quietly among themselves. They had heard fragments from the cockpit. They did not know the details, only that the fighter pilots outside were not escorting them for safety. They were escorting someone on board. Someone important in a way none of them had expected. The senior flight attendant approached 25C once. Again, her expression had changed. It was no longer just friendly, it was respectful, almost protective. She leaned in slightly. "Ma'am, the pilots wanted me to check on you. They said if you need anything, just let us know." The woman smiled warmly. "Thank you. I'm all right." The attendant hesitated, looked at the faded emblem again, and then spoke softly. "I don't know what that symbol means, but I can tell it matters." She paused. "And I'm glad you're on this flight." The woman simply nodded, touched by the sincerity. Outside, one of the F-35s shifted slightly, drifting a little closer, almost like a guardian adjusting position. The sun reflected off its canopy, revealing a silhouette inside. The pilot inside raised a gloved hand to the side of their helmet. Not a wave. Something closer to a silent acknowledgement. The woman's breath caught for a moment. Long ago, she had taught that gesture to a group of young pilots to acknowledge without words, to speak respect through movement instead of sound. She whispered under her breath. They remembered. Her eyes softened, not from sadness but from a deep pride she had carried quietly for decades. As the plane continued through the sky, her memories began connecting with the present, old faces, old missions, the people she had guided and protected, the principles she had lived by. She had not expected anyone to remember her. She had not expected to ever hear that call again, the one the F-35 pilots had used over the radio, Silent Wing. She had lived with that identity in silence, believing the world had moved on without her. But now, looking at the jets outside, She realized something she had almost forgotten. The sky never forgets those who serve it, and neither do the new generations who follow. The moment felt gentle, powerful, and strangely healing. She had spent a lifetime without recognition. Yet here she was being honored by pilots she had never even met. As she leaned back in her seat, the tension in her shoulders softened. Her memories no longer felt heavy. They felt alive again. The sky outside was no longer just a view from the window. It was a reminder that she had once belonged to it. The flight continued smoothly for another half hour, but the atmosphere inside the cabin had quietly changed. Even though most passengers still had no idea what was happening, they could sense a strange calm settling over everything. As if the entire aircraft was wrapped in a soft blanket of respect. The woman in 25C sat quietly, hands resting on her backpack. She felt lighter now, as if the sky itself had lifted a weight she had carried for years. But she also felt something else, a responsibility she had not expected to feel again. A faint chime echoed through the speakers, not alarming, but noticeable. The captain's voice came on, warm but slightly tense. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a minor issue with our cabin system. Everything is under control, and we appreciate your patience." Most passengers barely reacted, assuming it was something simple. But the woman immediately recognized the tone beneath his words. It was the voice of a pilot trying not to worry anyone while waiting for more information. A few rows ahead, a baby began to cry softly. Someone coughed nervously. Small signals of discomfort began to spread, the kind that appear when people sense something is different, even if they don't understand why. The cabin lights flickered gently only for half a second, but it was enough to make passengers look up. The woman in 25C closed her eyes, listening carefully. She did not listen to the sounds passengers heard. She listened to the aircraft itself. She had spent years learning to understand aircraft, not by looking at them, but by feeling their rhythm, the way each system had a voice of its own. The off-duty technician in row 22 unbuckled slightly and leaned into the aisle. "You felt that, didn't you?" he whispered. She nodded. "Just a small systems correction," she said softly. "But the captain will need to focus." The technician hesitated. Should we be worried?" She opened her eyes and smiled. "No, but they may need calm in the cabin. That is where you and I can help." He blinked, surprised. "Me?" "People trust what they see around them," she replied. "If we stay steady, they will too." Before he could answer, the senior flight attendant walked down the aisle again, this time with a bit more urgency in her expression. She approached the woman with quiet steps. "Ma'am." The captain asked if you might come forward again. He said you may understand something about the system message we received. The passengers in nearby seats turned, suddenly more curious than ever, but the woman did not rush. She simply touched the flight attendant's arm gently. "Before I go," she said softly, "walk through the cabin and smile. Tell people everything is fine. They will believe you." The attendant nodded, surprised at how natural the instruction felt coming from her. As the attendant stepped away, the woman rose slowly from her seat. Her movements were calm, confident, and strangely grounding. Even those who didn't know the situation felt reassured. Just by watching her. The young man in the window seat looked up at her with wide eyes. "Ma'am, is it serious?" "No," she replied gently. "Nothing that can't be handled. Just take a deep breath and enjoy the view." He nodded, comforted in a way he did not fully understand. As she walked toward the front, passengers watched with growing curiosity. She did not look like someone important. She did not look like someone heroic. She looked like someone who simply understood the sky better than anyone on board. Near the cockpit door, the attendant tapped the panel again, and the captain opened it quickly. Inside, the captain motioned for her to step into the small space behind their seats. He looked both relieved and uncertain. "Ma'am," he said quietly, We received a message from ground control about a secondary system reading. It's nothing dangerous, but they asked us to verify something manually while we maintain altitude. She nodded, her expression steady. I understand, she said. The co-pilot turned in his seat. You recognized the issue earlier, didn't you? I felt the adjustment, she replied. This aircraft is doing exactly what it's designed to do, but the cabin needs steady reassurance until the system resets. The captain sighed. Passengers are starting to sense something. We're trying to avoid unnecessary worry. Then let me help, she said softly. He hesitated. With respect, ma'am, how do you know so much about aircraft systems? She gave a gentle smile, the kind that carried more history than words. Because I spent many years trusting the sky, she said. And the sky trusted me back. The co-pilot stared at her, almost speechless. Outside, the F-35 shifted slightly. Again, closing the formation just a bit more, as if they knew she had returned to the cockpit. Their presence looked almost like a protective shield. The captain checked his monitors once more, then turned to her. The system should reset in a few minutes. We just need quiet in the cabin, she nodded. I'll take care of that. She stepped out of the cockpit and walked back into the aisle. But this time, her presence felt different. Passengers straightened as she passed. Even children stopped moving, sensing something calming about her. She did not speak loudly. She simply offered gentle smiles, small nods, and brief reassurances to whoever looked uneasy, and somehow, without any announcement, the entire cabin grew peaceful again. The plane continued through the sky, stable and calm, guided by pilots. In the cockpit, escorted by F-35s outside, and quietly steadied by the woman in 25C, whose leadership did not come from authority, but from a lifetime of knowing how to bring peace to the air. The cabin had grown calm again, a calm so steady that even the small children sensed it. Passengers leaned back into their seats, listening to the quiet hum of the engines, as if the flight had slipped into a gentle rhythm. No one knew exactly why things felt peaceful again, but the captain, the crew, and the woman in 25C did. She returned to her seat slowly, lowering herself with the same grace she had carried since stepping onto the plane. The young man at the window smiled nervously. Everything okay now? Yes, she said gently. Everything is steady. He relaxed, relieved by a voice that carried more certainty than any announcement. Outside, high above scattered clouds, the two F-35s continued their escort. Their metallic wings gleamed under the sunlight. They did not feel threatening. They looked like guardians, silent, disciplined, purposeful. Then something shifted. One F-35 moved slightly forward, taking a position just ahead of the commercial jet. The other eased back, aligning itself perfectly with the aircraft's tail. It was a formation few people ever see, and it meant only one thing: respect protocol. In the cockpit, the captain watched the jets move and felt a chill, not of fear, but of awe. He turned on the secure radio channel again. A moment later, the voice of the F-35 lead pilot came through, steadier and more formal than before. Flight 482. Guardian lead requesting permission for a private message to the passenger. In 25C, the captain looked at the co-pilot. They exchanged a glance of surprise. Never, in all their flying years, had they heard such a request. The captain pressed the button. Guardian lead, permission granted. Silence followed, heavy, intentional, respectful. Then the radio crackled again, but the voice was different. Now not just a pilot speaking. A soldier honoring someone who had come before. To the passenger in 25C, the pilot said gently, "This formation is for you." The woman in 25C lifted her head. Her eyes softened as she listened to the quiet words drifting from the cockpit speakers. The voice continued, steady but full of emotion the pilot tried hard to contain. "We were trained to recognize your emblem. trained to honor the ones who flew before us. The silent wing taught us discipline, courage, humility. Passengers nearby began leaning in, trying to hear the broadcast. They didn't know who the message was for, but they could feel its importance. The pilot spoke again, even slower now. You served in shadows we only read about. You carried skies we can only imagine, and today, the sky wants you to know. It remembers. The woman's hands gently tightened around her backpack. Her breathing grew deeper, not from sadness, but from gratitude she never expected to feel again. The young man beside her whispered, "Ma'am, is that message for you?" She nodded softly. The technician in row 22 felt his chest tighten with emotion. He had known what she was, but hearing it confirmed by fighter pilots in mid-air felt unreal. Then the radio carried one final message, short, simple, and spoken with absolute respect. "For the honor of Silent Wing, we stand for you." The jets responded immediately. Both F-35s ascended in perfect unison, rising slightly above the commercial aircraft, not aggressively, but ceremonially. A symbolic salute used only for the highest form of recognition. A gesture many pilots go their entire careers without witnessing. Gasps filled the cabin as passengers saw the jets rise. Some thought it was a maneuver, some thought it was a coincidence. But the woman in 25C understood exactly what it meant. This was a salute reserved for legends. Her eyes glistened. Not from pride, not from attention, but from something quieter: peace. The kind of peace that arrives only after years of service no one ever saw. The senior flight attendant approached her again, tears quietly gathering in her eyes. "Ma'am, they're honoring you, aren't they?" The woman nodded. "They're honoring all of us," she whispered. "Everyone who came before them. Everyone who carried the sky when it was heavy." The attendant placed a hand over her heart, unsure what to say, overwhelmed by the moment. Behind them, passengers whispered in awe as they watched the fighter jets hold their position standing in the air, the way soldiers stand at attention on the ground. Inside the cockpit, the captain could barely speak. "I have never seen anything like this," he whispered to the co-pilot. "I don't think we'll ever see it again." The co-pilot replied. Back in seat 25C, the woman exhaled slowly, letting the moment wash over her. After a lifetime of quiet service, the sky had finally spoken back to her, not with applause, not with fame, but with honor, the only language she ever believed in. Asterisk. The rest of the flight moved with a stillness that felt almost unreal. No one raised their voice. No one hurried. Even the children on board seemed quieter, as if they sensed the sky outside was carrying something important. The woman in 25C sat with her hands folded gently over her backpack, her eyes resting on the faint reflection of the F-35s in the window. She did not smile widely. She did not cry openly. But her expression carried the warmth of someone who had received a long-delayed acknowledgement, an honor she never sought, but deeply understood. The captain made a soft announcement over the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, the aircraft you see outside are accompanying us until landing. There is no cause for concern." He paused, his voice catching for just a moment. "They are here out of respect." Passengers looked around, whispering, "Respect? For what? For who?" Slowly their eyes drifted toward the aisle where she sat, though most still did not understand. The technician in row 22 stood up quietly, approached her row, and spoke softly, so only she could hear. "Ma'am, I think everyone on this plane should know who you are." She looked up at him, kindness filling her eyes. "No," she said gently. This moment was never about being seen. It was about remembering what it meant to serve. He nodded slowly, realizing she meant every word. As the plane began its gentle descent, the sunlight brightened the cabin, washing everything in gold. Outside, the F-35s adjusted their position again, one rising slightly above the nose of the aircraft, the other lowering just enough to keep perfect symmetrical balance. A ceremonial escort all the way home. The young man at the window wiped his eyes without understanding why he felt emotional. "Ma'am, you must have been someone very important," he whispered. She took a slow breath. "I was simply someone who tried to do what was right," she answered. The wheels touched down softly on the runway, smoother than anyone expected. Even the landing felt respectful, as if guided by invisible hands. As the aircraft slowed, the passengers saw something they had never seen before. Airport personnel, ground crew, technicians, and even a few uniformed officers stood outside in a line near the taxiway. They were not saluting formally, but standing in stillness, hands behind their backs, watching the aircraft pass. As if they had received a message too. As if they knew someone special was on board. The woman watched them quietly. Her eyes softened, not from pride, but from a deep sense of completion. When the plane reached the gate and the seatbelt sign turned off, people began gathering their belongings. But for the first time on any commercial flight, no one rushed to stand up. Instead, rows of passengers turned toward her row. Not with curiosity, with respect. Young woman from row 18 stepped forward first. "Ma'am, I don't know who you were up there, but thank you." The woman in 25C nodded gently. "You're welcome," she whispered. A father holding his child approached. "Those jets, were they here for you?" She did not answer directly. Instead, she touched the child's shoulder lightly. "They were here to remind us that some things are worth honoring." The senior flight attendant returned, eyes shining with quiet emotion. She held out a hand, not to shake, but simply to offer support. "May I walk you out?" she asked. The woman smiled softly. "Of course." As she stood, something unexpected happened. Passengers in every row stepped aside, not because anyone told them to, but because it felt right. A natural, quiet gesture of respect. Some placed their hands over their hearts. Some bowed their heads. Some simply stood still, letting her pass like someone carrying history in her steps. She walked slowly down the aisle, an aisle she had walked earlier as just another traveler. But now the cabin felt different, not louder, not brighter, only more aware. When she reached the exit door, the captain himself was waiting. His voice trembled slightly when he spoke. "Ma'am, it was an honor to fly with you today." She met his eyes, offering a warm nod. "The honor was shared," she said softly. "Your sky is in good hands." She stepped onto the jet bridge, and the air outside felt familiar, fresh, open, honest. The kind of air she had once lived in for most of her life. The two F-35s outside had already circled upward in a clean, graceful arc. Their wings lifted slightly one last time before they soared higher, disappearing into the bright afternoon sky. The woman paused and watched them go. She whispered something only the sky could hear. "Thank you for remembering." Then she walked forward, disappearing into the terminal crowd like any other traveler, quiet, ordinary, unnoticed. Yet everyone who had been on Flight 482 would remember her for the rest of their lives. Not because they learned her name, but because they witnessed the day the sky honored someone who served it in silence.